Welcome to the Leadership Edge. This show is dedicated to building and developing your personal leadership. And our shows are going to really cover the essence of what effective leaders do. My name is Ted Gorski. I am part of an organization called Get Your Edge, and I'm a professional leadership and executive coach. Been doing this for over 13 years. And what I'm going to share with you in our shows is some of the essence of what effective leaders do. We're going to have guests on the show that are going to help us kind of analyze what leadership is, and I'm going to share with you some of my examples on how you can really focus on developing your leadership skills. We're not only going to look at this from an adult perspective, but this is going to be a great show to really help the teenagers understand what true leadership is all about. So I'm excited to share some of this knowledge and information with you in order for us to really analyze what effective leadership is. So before we get started, I'd like to really get on the first thing is to understand what leadership is all about. What is that definition of leadership? And the way I see it, it's the ability to socially influence others toward a common goal. What effective leaders do is able to work with others in a way in which others want to follow them. We have heard many things in the past about leadership and this whole command control type of leadership. That in itself is not what I call effective leadership. It's really the whole purpose here is to want to have people want to follow you. And most importantly, leadership is about having the best interests of people. It's understanding that people are what it's all about. It's the ability to get the most out of people, even though they don't see it or even know it. Effective leaders have that ability to connect with those people, to be able to get into their unique abilities to succeed in organizations. And for the young players out there who are playing on youth teams, effective leadership is really helping your fellow teammates. It's understanding how to connect with them, to build that ability to really help them through a situation or through a problem. And we're going to talk more about this later in the show today, but it's important to really understand that it's the ability that people want to follow you. It's not you're pushing them or prodding them, it's your ability to have them pull into you to help you achieve a goal. So what are those characteristics of leadership? We hear them all the time. What are those characteristics that really make what we call an ideal leader? Now, there's a lot of things that we're looking at here, but I want to highlight several of these that are really very, very important. One of the things that we always hear is that leaders have to be charismatic. Let me tell you, in my experience as a professional leadership coach in organizations, I have seen highly charismatic people, and at the same time, I have heard and seen and worked with quiet leaders. So this whole idea that leaders have to be charismatic is not necessarily the case. So you can be a very quiet leader, but there's certain essence of things you have to do in order to make that happen. But charisma is not necessarily one of them. The other thing that's listed here is capabilities, being capable. And when I look at capable, it's all about setting people up for success. Leaders set other people up. For example, we all have heard the story and maybe know of John Wooden. John Wooden was a basketball coach for the UCLA Bruins, and they won a number of NCAA college basketball championships. He was a very successful college coach. Now, because his program was so successful, one of the things he used to do is, on the first day of practice, he would call in all his players. Now, mind you, these are star basketball players, the upper echelon of college basketball recruits. And he would teach them how to put on their socks and their sneakers in order for them to perform at optimal levels. Now, why did he do that? Well, Coach Wooden felt that if he taught them how to put them on and put their socks and their sneakers on, that they would avoid blisters. And if you avoid blisters in a critical part of the game, you might be able to make a cut to the basket or defend a player more effectively. What he was doing was setting people up for success because he looked at every nook and cranny on how to help his players to be successful. So capability and understanding that is real important. I have a personal story in which I helped someone back in my corporate days when I worked in leadership roles in senior executive positions. I had a gentleman, his name was Jim, and he worked for another group. I saw Jim's capabilities. Because he was working in this other group, this other leader was not really treating him very well. Matter of fact, he yelled at him one time because the sub that he got for him at a local sub shop had cheese on him, and he did it in front of a lot of people in our open lunchroom. This is the type of behavior that he was dealt with on a daily basis. I knew Jim. I saw Jim, and I saw that he had a lot of capabilities and a lot of skills that he didn't realize. Well, long story short, he ended up joining my organization, and within 6 months, he became not only the highest performer on my team, but the highest performer in the whole organization. I saw what Jim could offer. I saw the capabilities they have, and successful leaders are able to do that. So it's your ability to really see that and really show people that they have that. Going back to that list, the other thing that's really important is the ability to be an excellent communicator. Let me say this, in all my time in working with leaders and organizations, I have not bumped into a leader that didn't have excellent communication skills. They were able to connect with others at a very, very deep level. But as part of this, by definition, is leaders are great listeners. You have to be when you're communicating with others. And it's real important that you have this skill set because it leads to something else, which is called empathy. It's your ability to understand where people are at and really build a connection with them. So part of an excellent communicator is being direct, being open, and really understanding and realizing what someone's saying. And the last thing I want to talk about is motivational. I mean, we are, as leaders, have to motivate others to perform at very high levels. So motivational is all about having the ability to get people to perform at high levels, even when they're not at that point of being ready to be at those levels. A lot of leaders have to be motivational to get the most out of their people as well, which means they have to have a can-do attitude. Having a can-do attitude, which is quite positive, is really going to help people be very motivational. So for the young players out there, maybe there's someone on your team that's not performing well, they're going through a tough time. Part of being motivational is going up to them and really helping them kind of to get through that type of situation. So you can see that there's very, very lots of different types of characteristics that are vital for successful leadership. And the last thing I want to really talk about that's not on this list but should be is basically integrity. An ideal leader has integrity not only in what they do but how they do it. It's the old walk the talk mentality. And we see this in people like Tom Brady. Now, Tom Brady is probably one of the hardest workers on the New England Patriots. The quarterback of the New England Patriots is in early, watching tape on his next team that he has to face. But what Tom does, he models the behavior. So if he goes up to a player and says, listen, you need to put in more time, Tom is walking the talk. And true leaders do that. So it's not just do as I say, not as I do. It's really showing and modeling that behavior. And effective leaders have that ability. But you know, there are certain myths that are out there that there are sometimes that have to be faced with a lot of leaders. And I bump into these all the time in my work. And I want to debunk some of these so people can really understand where leaders are all about. One of the things we've always heard is leaders are born. Well, to some extent that's true. But I have the belief, and based on my experience in working with leaders, I have a twist on this. I see as leaders are reborn. Because I think leaders have that ability to really learn to be more effective by coaching them, and which we do, is to really help them understand what the essence of those characteristics that we talked about that they have to have. Because leadership is not a rare skill. Going back to the previous slide, leadership is a skill that everyone can possess. It isn't just in a select few. It's the ability, and that's kind of we as leadership coaches do, is we take those skills and bring them to the forefront. We bring them up to the next level. So it doesn't become a rare skill. The other myth that we're debunking also is that leaders are found at the top of organizations or atop at in sports teams. Leaders can be at every level of the organization. And what we try to do in helping that, in developing those leaders, is helping them understand that leaders can be at all levels of the organization. And the more leaders that there are in an organization, the more effective that organization is going to be. Lastly, leaders direct and manipulate people. This is the biggest myth to debunk. Leaders do direct, but true leaders do not manipulate people. Because think about it for a minute. Manipulation means that if you are working with somebody and you felt you're being manipulated, you're being felt that you're being taken advantage of. What true leaders realize, it's not about manipulation. It's not about trying to get the most out of the situation that they really need. It's really understanding that you want to bring people along with you. And if they feel that there's a certain sense of manipulation, it's not going to be effective leadership. So true leaders realize that manipulating people is the biggest and worst thing that they can do. And the goal of true leadership is really making sure that doesn't happen. So let's talk about this whole thing about managers and leaders, because that comes out quite a bit. There's a huge distinct difference between the two. And the whole concept of this show is really focusing on the right side of that column. The whole goal of this show is to really get you to understand what leaders are. Managers maintain, and what we talk about is managers maintain the day-to-day. What do we need to do to get by today? Whereas leaders build. They build for tomorrow. They're building toward a future. They're building toward a vision. So there's a whole different perspective there. Again, short-term for managers versus long-term. Again, managers looking for what do we get through today, whereas leaders are looking at get through tomorrow. Managers monitor. They watch and make sure things happen, whereas leaders are very proactive. Leaders are looking at what they need to do to really solve a situation and solve a problem long term, and usually try to find it before it actually happens. Managers tell people what to do. It's do this or do that. Whereas leaders are more, like we said in the first slide, are more socially persuasive. They're trying to sell their position. They're trying to sell their role, sell their idea. Again, drawing people toward them. And lastly, managers are about positional power. This is not what we're talking about in terms of leaders. Leaders have what we call strong personal power. This is their ability to connect, influence, and really work with other people. So what we're looking at here is a huge distinction, and what we're going to be focusing on this show is really, if we can bring the slide back up, is really focusing on that right side. We're going to teach you and talk about how to build this long-term perspective. We're going to talk about how do we influence others, how do we sell our thoughts and ideas, and more importantly, how do we bring people into a conversation and bring into something to help us to be successful. So we're really going to focus in on that on this show to really help people understand what they really need to do. Now, in order for us to be effective leaders, there's a certain transition that we have to go through. And there's a certain idea that you have to really focus on. We've talked about certain important values that leaders have to understand. But the whole concept here is to translate personal values into deliberate actions. What we're talking about here is in a lot of work that we do with leaders, it's about them understanding the value, their values, their beliefs, what they believe in, what they want out of life. A lot of our work is really starting internally with the leader. So what we're talking about here is really getting the leader to understand how to translate that internal power they have, understanding their values and beliefs, into some kind of action. Going back to what we said earlier about Tom Brady, if your idea is to model behavior and you're telling people to put in extra work, well, you have to translate that value into a deliberate action. So what does that mean? Well, if you value hard work, you as a leader have to model hard work. And that's what the true essence of leadership is that people can see that not only are you saying what you believe, but you're actually doing it. As you can probably tell, we have many people in Washington, in our Congress, in our Senate, and in all levels of our government who don't necessarily do that. And that affects their leadership because it's all about integrity. So the whole concept here is really getting you to realize that everything you do as a leader is magnified. Everything you do as a leader is looked at. And in order for you to translate these personal values into deliberate actions, you really have to understand who the true essence of who you are in order to do that. So if integrity is something that's very strong in you, you have to show that integrity in everything you do. If you believe that hard work's important, you have to show that, the hard work. That's what we're talking about here. So, what do we want to do today? What do we want to focus in on? How can I help you today in today's show, taking all this information in and really having you take the most value out of this? Well, what we like to do is really finish off and look at a couple of things as leaders. What's important here is, again, we're looking at the internal process of kind of who you are. We're looking at kind of your preferred way to do things. And as leaders, this is kind of the initial journey that I usually bring all my people that I coach in leadership through, to really have them understand how they're coming across to others. And the first one is how they learn. Now, many people learn in different ways. There are three major ways that people learn. First of all, there's what we call kinesthetic. And what we mean by that is that people learn by doing. So I can tell them and ask them and explain to them as much as possible, but when I have them do that particular action or that particular job, they understand what I'm getting at. Second part is what we call audio, which I can tell someone how to do something and describe it to them. Those learners, by that particular way, will pick up and understand. And lastly, there's the visual learner, who actually has to see it. So maybe it's going on a whiteboard. Maybe it's kind of grabbing a piece of paper and showing them a pretty picture. But those people learn on visual approaches. Now, why is this so important? Well, in a lot of my work with leaders, I always get the same question of, why do my people keep on coming back to me with the same question? And what that tells me is that there's a distinct learning style difference, meaning that the leader has one way of learning and teaching something, whereas the receiver has a different approach. For example, if you are a kinesthetic learner, which means you learn by doing, if I tell you an audio perspective of what to do, most likely you're not going to really grasp the essence of what I'm talking about. So what I need to do is understand as a leader what your style is and kind of tailor that together so that matches. So if I'm giving you the instructions, I'm going to match it to doing it kinesthetically. So you can see why this is pretty important information. So the first thing I want to challenge you is, what's your preferred way? How do you like to learn? Are you more a kinesthetic doer? Are you more a visual person? Or are you more of an audio learner? Now, as a leader, that's real important to understand your style. But more importantly, if you're working with others, try to figure out what style they are. Understand their approach, because this is going to help you become a better leader, and especially giving those most important vital instructions. The second thing I want to talk about in wrapping up today is communication. Now, we've talked about the importance of communication, and we've talked about the importance of effective communication. But there are four major styles in how people communicate, which has a very direct impact on how they communicate with others. The first way is what we call a direct communicator, who pretty much tells you straight out, as it is, how they see things. So if they like you, they tell you. If they think your idea is bad, they'll tell you. But they're pretty much open and direct on how they're feeling. The second, we have the socializer. We have the one that talks to everybody. You know those people. They come into the office, they say hi to everybody. You think they're running for mayor. It's incredible. But they're a socializer type of people. They like to talk and talk and talk. But those people kind of want to build a personal relationship with. They want to build it in a very, very connected level. Thirdly, we have what's called the steadiness person. You know, this is the person who's that steady Eddie, who's very calm and composed, very warm and friendly, that their tone is very discussion level, still very people-oriented, but not as loud as that socializer. Those people are more calm. They're more team-oriented. Now, why is this all important? Well, a team-oriented person is really looking at the warmth and friendliness of the team. And it's really important to understand what's happening in their particular world. And lastly, we have what's called the analyzer. These are your meticulous, detailed people who really focus on the details. They follow on rules. They follow process, which means that when you're working with them, those things are very, very important. There's no cutting corners. You know, these are your bean counters. These are your CPA people who are going to look at process and make sure it's done. Now, why is this all important? Well, you're one particular style. You're one of these. Now, if you're communicating with others, most likely they're going to be a little bit different than you. The whole goal here is to really understand how to communicate with each and every one of these particular styles effectively. And leaders, number one, know what their preferred style is, and number two, how to work with other styles. Because leaders understand, in order for them to connect with others, they need that ability to do so. And by adapting your style to someone that's a little bit different than you is going to make leaders more effective. Because it's that ability, again, to socially persuade others to your point of view. So I challenge you. Where are you on that scale? What style are you? Look around. The people in your office, what style are they? Are they indifferent than you? What approaches would you need to make? If you were playing a sports team, what are your fellow teammates? How can you give them insight? How can you help them if they're going through a tough spell? How can you work on your communication style to connect with them? Because they also will connect and probably have a different style than you. So it's being aware and cognizant of that approach. So as an executive coach and leadership coach, what we tend to do is when we coach people, we leave them with what we call homework. So I've given you two pieces of homework to do today. Number one, check out your learning style. What is it? Try to figure it out. Number two, look at your communication style and see what that's all about and see who you are in the office. So this is going to help you have become a better understanding, first of all, of yourself, which is really the essence of what's called true leadership. So this will end our first show with some tidbits. So hopefully you'll have an understanding of what this show is all about. Our time's almost done here, so what I like to do is, at this point, I'd like to invite you to our future shows in which we're going to explore leadership even more in the various areas that we talked about with special guests and doing this kind of format as well. So we invite you to future shows. And again, if there's anything that we can do from a leadership perspective, my name is Ted Gorski, and my company we're from is called Get Your Edge. Thanks for watching tonight, and see you next time.